Close your eyes for a second and picture this. It's late afternoon, the sun is still low over the mountains, and through the window of a wooden house a thin trail of smoke is rising from a fireplace lit too early because winter arrived ahead of schedule. There's no television on, no phone buzzing. Just the sound of a cast-iron skillet scraping against the stove, the sound of a wooden knife hitting the cutting board, and the smell of onions browning in fat that has already filled the whole house before you even open the door. That's 1970-something in the Appalachian Mountains. Dad just got home from the furniture factory, his overalls still smelling of sawdust, his paycheck barely covering the electric bill and the gas station. And yet, on top of that stove, there's dinner for 6. How? With a little less than a pound of ground beef, stretched out with whatever came from the garden, with rice, with flour, with whatever was in the pantry. The woman in that kitchen didn't have a fancy cookbook, didn't have a video on her phone walking her through the steps. She had what her mother had taught her, what the neighbor had shared over the fence, and necessity, which, honestly, has always been the best cook there ever was. These recipes aren't in any fancy cookbook today. They survived the way truly important things survive, passed mouth to mouth, from one handwritten recipe card to the next, until the day, without anyone quite noticing, they stopped being made. And that's exactly what I went looking for over the past few months, digging up these nearly forgotten recipes, talking to people who still remember, and bringing this almost 50-year journey back to you. Now come back to the present for a moment, because I need to warn you about something. There's a dish on this list that made grown adults go quiet at the table just from the smell coming out of the kitchen, and it's saved for number 1, on purpose, for the very end. And if you get distracted along the way, you're going to miss dish number 13, the one almost every family in the mountains made at least once a week. And today, if you ask anyone under 50, nobody even remembers the name. I'm going to give you a quick challenge. Count how many of these recipes you recognize. I'll bet you'll remember 2, maybe 3 at first. But wait until you're halfway through the list, because that's where this trip back in time turns into real family memory, the kind that puts a lump in your throat. And if at some point you catch yourself thinking, wow, my grandmother made exactly that, hold on to that thought, because that's exactly why this video exists. The subscribe QR code stays fixed on screen for the entire video. If you don't want to miss the next videos in this series about America's forgotten food, point your camera at it now and lock in your spot. In the 1970s, with inflation soaring and beef prices climbing almost every month, families in the Appalachian Mountains found a way of cooking that turned little into plenty. It wasn't a choice. It was survival. Nothing went to waste. The fat from the meat became the base for gravy. The bone became stock. Even potato peels became seasoning for something else. And the result was dishes so clever that a lot of comfort food restaurants today charge good money for fancy versions of recipes that were born precisely because there wasn't a dime left over for fancy anything. Let's start from the bottom of today's list, because I want you to see the simplest dishes first before we get to the ones that will really catch you off guard. Stick with me until the end. Number 25. Country ground. Beef soup. There was nothing fancy about this one, and that's exactly why it earns the honor of opening our list. Ground beef, carrots, potatoes, and whatever was left in the garden, all simmering together in a big pot all day long, on top of a wood stove that was already lit anyway. So why not put that heat to use? The broth turned so rich, from the meat slowly releasing its flavor, that it tasted like an entire burger had dissolved right into the soup. It was the dish that showed up every time winter tightened its grip on the mountains, served in a metal mug, because a real plate was for Sundays. Kids came home from school with cheeks red from the cold, and that steaming bowl of soup on the table was the kind of welcome nobody forgets, even decades later. Number 24. Beef and cabbage skillet cabbage. Cost pennies and stretched into gallons of food, and in a time when every penny counted, that was no small detail. The dish started by browning the beef right in its own fat, wasting nothing, then piling on thick-cut cabbage and letting it wilt down slowly until it turned into soft, slightly sweet ribbons, almost caramelized at the edges. A splash of vinegar at the end cut through the sweetness and brought everything back into balance. It was served with a thick slice of homemade bread, because no one, ever, would let a single drop of that sauce go to waste sitting at the bottom of the plate. Simple? Yes. Forgettable? Not a chance. Anyone who grew up eating this still thinks of cooked cabbage as the smell of home. Number 23. Porcupine Meatballs. They were called Porcupine Meatballs because of the raw rice poking out while they cooked inside the tomato sauce, creating that funny effect of little white quills breaking through the red surface. Kids loved the name and loved counting the quills on their own meatball even more. The rice went in raw, mixed right into the beef, along with finely chopped onion and an egg to bind it all, and it was the sauce itself that slowly cooked the rice as everything came together in one pot. Curious? Just wait until you see the version of this that shows up later on this list, because the same idea, baked instead of simmered on the stove, is even more clever. Hold on to that detail. Number 22. Beef and macaroni skillet. Before any store-bought product came along to make this easier, mountain families were already doing it themselves, purely on instinct and trial and error. Beef browned almost to the point of burning on purpose, because that dark crust stuck to the pan is what gave everything its flavor later. Macaroni cooked straight in the broth, soaking up every drop of that seasoning instead of being boiled separately and left bland. Cheese melted on top only in the last few minutes, forming strings that stuck to the fork. All in one pan, because nobody had the time or a sink big enough to wash 3 different pots after a full day working outside the home, often at 2 jobs at once. Number 21. Creamy ground beef gravy over mashed potatoes. A thick, peppery gravy, made from the meat's own drippings mixed with flour and milk until it thickened, poured generously over a mountain of buttery mashed potatoes. It looked like so little when it hit the plate, just ground beef and potatoes after all. But it filled you up, and filled you up in a way that felt like a hug. The trick was in the black pepper, used fearlessly almost to excess, because that's what gave it the comforting kick that turned a simple meal into an emotional memory. A lot of people who grew up on this still say to this day that no fancy restaurant can quite replicate that exact taste, because it's missing the hand of someone cooking with what they had, not what was sitting in a supply closet. Number 20. Homemade tamale pie. A base of beef seasoned with chili powder and cumin, topped with a generous layer of cornmeal batter that baked into a golden crust on top and stayed soft, almost creamy underneath. Nobody could say for sure where this recipe actually came from, whether it arrived with migrant workers from the South, was invented at home, or turned up in some local newspaper, only that every household on the block had its own version, each one swearing theirs was the original. That kind of friendly rivalry, by the way, was common. Every family had the right recipe, and heaven help anyone who said otherwise at a church potluck. Number 19. Meatloaf muffins. Someone, somewhere in the mountains, noticed a simple thing that changed everything. A traditional meatloaf took over an hour to bake, but in individual muffin tins, it cooked in less than half that time, and so this version was born and quickly became a favorite among families short on time. It cooked faster, browned evenly on every side, something a traditional meatloaf never managed, only ever browning on top, and could still be frozen ahead for the busiest days of the week. Kids loved it because each one got their own little loaf, like a personal gift instead of a shared slice. If you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, now's the perfect time to point your phone at the QR code fixed on screen. That way you won't miss the next videos in this series about recipes that vanished from American kitchens. Number 18. Biscuit ring with beef filling. A simple little trick of presentation. Refrigerated biscuit dough arranged in a circle on a baking sheet, filled in the center with seasoned beef, onions, and sometimes a handful of corn or green beans for color, then folded over to cover part of the filling. It looked like something from a fancy bakery when it came out of the oven. Golden, full of curves. The kind of thing you'd set in the middle of the table to impress an unexpected guest. But it took only 15 minutes of actual prep. That was the best-kept secret of homemakers back then. Looking like you spent the whole afternoon in the kitchen, when really you had time left over to catch the end of the evening soap opera. Number 17. Baked beef and rice casserole. The no-fuss cousin of the porcupine meatballs you saw earlier. Instead of shaping meatball after meatball, a task that took time and patience, everything went straight into the baking dish raw and baked for about an hour in the oven, no one needing to keep an eye on it. The rice swelled inside the beef little by little, soaking up the tomato sauce and forming a slightly charred crust on top in the last few minutes. And honestly, that crust was the part everyone fought over first, sneaking a quick forkful before it was even served to everyone else. It was the perfect dish for a mother who worked outside the home. Assemble it all in the morning, leave it in the fridge, and just pop it in the oven the moment she got home. Number 16. Baked ground beef jambalaya. A simplified version, almost a distant tribute, to a traditional New Orleans dish, except adapted with whatever was actually in the mountain pantry. Bell peppers from the backyard, onion, canned tomatoes, and a packet of onion soup mix standing in for all that complex original seasoning. It wasn't authentic, and no one pretended it was. But it was different enough to break up the weekly routine, bring a little extra spice and kick to the table, and get the kids asking, "What is this?" out of curiosity instead of resistance. That little taste of adventure, however modest, was worth the whole dish. Number 15. Biscuit and beef bake layers of beef, mixed with cream of mushroom soup on the bottom, forming a rich, creamy base, topped with pieces of biscuit dough that baked into golden clouds on top, soaked in gravy underneath, but still crisp up top. A combination of textures, soft below, fluffy and crisp above, that nobody forgot after trying it once. This was the dish mothers brought to church gatherings, knowing full well the dish would come home completely empty, scraped clean by forks of neighbors too polite to ask for the recipe on the spot, though they'd always ask quietly afterward. Number 14. Mock fancy steak. When an actual prime cut of beef cost the equivalent of a full week's groceries, families invented this. A thick, hand-formed hamburger patty, seasoned with a touch of liquid smoke, that mysterious little bottled ingredient that brought campfire flavor without ever needing a grill. Served on a plate, never on a bun, and finished with a dark, glossy sauce that mimicked the look of a restaurant dinner. Nobody was fooled, of course. Everyone knew it was hamburger in disguise. But everyone also felt, for that one evening, like they were dining somewhere a little more special than their own kitchen. And sometimes that's exactly what a family needs, to feel special without spending a dime more. Number 13. Baked beef and potato hash. Here's the dish I warned you about at the very beginning, so pay attention because it earns it. Quick to put together, ready in under 10 minutes of prep before it even hit the oven, this hash mixed frozen shredded hash browns, beef, a soup-based cream, sour cream, and shredded cheddar cheese, all topped with crushed cornflakes for a crunchy crust after baking. A lot of people ate this for dinner, then reheated that same dish for breakfast the next morning with a fried egg on top, turning leftovers into an entirely new meal. Just like that, one recipe became two. Number 12. Mountain-style meat pie. A homemade crust made of flour and lard, kneaded smooth, filled with beef, potatoes, and diced carrots, seasoned with nothing more than salt, pepper, and a little thyme that grew almost wild in the backyard. It could be made ahead of time, assemble the whole pie in the morning and bake it right before dinner, which was pure gold for anyone working outside the home all day with no time to cook from scratch every single night. The golden, flaky crust hid a filling that steamed the moment it was cut open, and the smell that filled the house while it baked was, on its own, reason enough for the whole family to gather in the kitchen before dinner was even called. Number 11. Cornbread with beef baked in. A liquid cornmeal batter, almost like a thick pancake mix, poured over already seasoned and browned beef, and baked together until it turned into something between cornbread and a soufflé. Fluffy inside, slightly crisp at the edges. Nobody could quite say whether it was a side dish or the main course, and honestly, it never mattered. It was served straight from the baking dish, everyone helping themselves with a spoon, no ceremony required. And there was something comforting about that lack of ceremony. As if the meal itself said, "Here, no one needs to worry about anything except eating well." Number 10. Homemade sloppy joes. Made purely out of stubbornness by someone who refused to open a can that already existed on store shelves, insisting instead on making it from scratch, by hand. Beef, onion, finely chopped bell pepper, ketchup, mustard, brown sugar, and vinegar simmered slowly until it turned into a thick, glossy sauce. Messy on purpose? The kind of food that drips down your fingers and calls for double or triple the napkins. It was the sandwich kids begged to bring to school on special days, knowing full well they'd end up with stains on their clothes because every mess was worth it. Before we move on, a quick reminder. The subscribe QR code is still right there on screen for the whole video. If you want to make sure you don't miss the next video in this series, that's your cue. Number 9. Simplified beef enchilada casserole. Everything a traditional enchilada had, just layered inside one big baking dish instead of rolled tortilla by tortilla, one at a time, in a job that would have taken all afternoon. Corn tortillas cut into strips, seasoned beef, beans, cheese, the layers repeated until the dish was full, then baked until it bubbled at the edges and browned on top. It was Mexican night, Saturday for the family, with none of the individual assembly work, just the satisfaction of cutting a generous square for each plate and topping it with a spoonful of sour cream. Number 8. Baked deconstructed burrito bake. The idea was pretty much the same as the enchilada casserole you just saw, only with more beans and more layers of stacked tortillas, forming something that looked a lot like lasagna, just with Tex-Mex seasoning instead of Italian. It was cut into square slices once baked and cool enough to hold its shape, and each piece really did look like a slice of savory cake, with the layers clearly visible on the side. This was the dish that delivered the most servings for the least cost, which is why it showed up often in houses with 4 or 5 kids to feed. Number 7. Beef and rice stuffed peppers. Bell pepper halves became edible little bowls, hollowed out and stuffed with a mixture of beef, already cooked rice, and tomato sauce, topped with melted cheese only in the final 10 minutes in the oven, so it wouldn't burn. It was pretty enough to serve unexpected company, each person getting their own individual pepper, which gave it an almost restaurant-like feel, and practical enough for a plain old Tuesday, no occasion needed beyond feeding the week's hunger. And it had one extra perk mothers loved. The kids ate their vegetables without complaint, because the vegetable was, quite literally, the plate itself. Number 6. Cornbread-Topped beef pie. A beef filling seasoned with a sauce that was half sweet, half spicy, usually ketchup, a touch of chili, and caramelized onion, topped with a cornmeal batter that baked into a golden crust that cracked slightly on the surface, revealing the hot filling underneath when cut. It looked like a fancy Sunday dinner, the kind you'd set the tablecloth out for, but it cost pennies and basically used up an entire week's worth of leftovers, disguised beneath one golden, inviting layer. It was the kind of culinary magic only someone who had to stretch every last penny truly knew how to pull off. Number 5. End of the month improvised casserole. No fixed recipe, and maybe that's exactly why it's one of the most touching dishes on this list. Whatever was left in the pantry went in. No exceptions. Canned corn, beans, canned tomatoes, anything that had been sitting there longer than it should have, along with the ground beef and a packet of soup mix to bind it all together with flavor. On top, potato chips bought in a bag, crushed by hand, formed a crunchy layer the kids would literally fight over, forks and all, to see who got the first bite. It was born out of pure necessity, out of that tight stretch at the end of the month before the next paycheck, but it tasted so good it became a special request even on days when there was no need to pinch pennies anymore. Number 4. Ground beef patties with caramelized onion and gravy. A hamburger patty shaped by hand, unhurried, browned deep in the skillet until it formed a dark, crusty exterior, served with onions cooked low and slow until sweet and soft, almost melting, and a gravy made right in the same pan, scraping up every browned bit stuck to the bottom, mixed with flour and the juices the meat itself released. It made it feel like the family was eating a real, expensive steak. And the kids, honestly, truly believed that it was. They'd only discovered the difference years later, at an actual restaurant, and often still preferred Mum's version anyway. Number 3. Corn chip beef casserole. Born from a happy accident, a bag of corn chips that had gone slightly stale, almost past their prime, that nobody wanted to just throw away. Beef seasoned with improvised Mexican spices, a little chili powder, some cumin, whatever was in the cupboard, along with beans, corn, and tomatoes, topped generously with the crushed chips and whatever cheese was left over from the week. It baked until the topping turned crisp on the outside and soft underneath, creating a surprising contrast of textures for a dish literally born out of leftovers. It became a regular in many homes, even long after the original reason for making it, not wasting stale chips, had stopped mattering at all. Number 2. Shipwreck casserole, the dish of leftovers. This is one of the hidden favorites on this list, saved almost until the very end on purpose, because it deserves your full attention. The name came from exactly what it was. Everything shipwrecked in the fridge by the end of the month. Bits of vegetables, ends of cheese, half a package of this, a little leftover of that, mixed with beef, a can of cream soup, and on top, a thick, generous layer of crushed potato chips. Families requested this dish on purpose even in times of plenty, when money was no longer an issue, purely for the memory it carried. Because there's a kind of recipe you don't ask for because of the taste. You ask for it because of the longing. Number 1. Mountain-style Salisbury steak. And here's the dish that closed out any Sunday in the Appalachian kitchens on a perfect note. The reason I asked you to be patient until now. Long before it became synonymous with cheap frozen dinners sold in an aluminum tray in the grocery store freezer, this is what it was. Ground beef shaped by hand into individual patties, browned until it formed a dark, appetizing crust, topped with onions caramelized low and slow, almost burnt on purpose at the edges, and finished with a thick gravy made right in the same skillet, capturing every last drop of flavor left behind. The kids truly believed they were eating expensive steak, the kind you only saw on special occasions. And deep down, whoever made it knew that, in a way, they were. just made with love instead of money, which, let's be honest, is an ingredient no shopping list can ever replace. And that's how we close out this 50-year journey through Appalachian kitchens. 25 dishes, 25 small proofs that resourcefulness and love have always mattered more than any expensive ingredient. Whether you recognized 3, 5, or all 25 dishes on this list, that's no coincidence, it's living memory, passed down from generation to generation, surviving even when it seemed like it might be lost forever. If this trip down memory lane stirred up something in you, now's the time to point your phone at the QR code fixed on screen and subscribe, so you don't miss the next videos in this journey through the food the Appalachians almost let disappear.